The truth, or the rain. Once upon a time, there was a boy who had known nothing but love his entire life, and in being loved, he began to love the world back. When the sun shined, his love shined with it. He found that laying in the grass while the sun softly cupped his face brought him a simple joy. He had vivid memories of the sun. For example, going to the beach with his family, playing with his friends, hiking with his cousins, playing basketball with his uncles, farming with his grandma, hunting with his dad, kissing his mother's cheek, hugging his sisters, laughing with his brother, watching his grandpa cook, sleeping in a sleeping bag, discussing with his teachers, and listing things to himself. Because of these memories, at an early age, the boy learned that love was like the sun, because the sun brought happiness. Along with the sun, the boy learned to love the clouds. Sometimes, when the sun's love became overbearing, the clouds would bring a moment of relief. He liked to imagine that the clouds changed forms. Sometimes, he saw animals. Other times, he saw people. Most times, he waited for the sun to come back. The sun was a source of joy, but it was okay to not need it all the time, especially if it began to burn him. Still, he loved the sun and the clouds. As the boy watched the sun and the clouds, he learned to love the space in between them. The blue of the sky began to capture more and more of his vision. Instead of searching for clouds, he stared at a single piece of the sky. He could still feel the warmth of the sun, but now he began to see how it all worked. If it so happened that a cloud would move into that single piece of the sky he stared at, then he would think about what it meant to be a cloud. The sky became something he held dearly because it connected the things he loved. In learning of the sun, the clouds, and the sky, he could feel love. And yet, there was a limit between him, the sun, the clouds, and the sky. To say that he was loved would be to say that the sky and the sun were always there, because the truth is, at some points in his life, he couldn't see the sky and the sun. The clouds would become overbearing, turning the sky's soft blues into dark shades of grays. Then, it would all come tumbling down. When it rained, a part of him felt like the raindrops, seemingly falling forever, only to hit the side of a window or the sharp edge of a blade of grass. The boy watched as if the blade of grass or the side of the window and the raindrops were meant to meet each other. For a time, he thought he was meant to stay inside when it rained, even if he had the strongest desire to go outside. He began to learn how to be content. He found that there were things to do in his home. He learned how to draw, then to read, and then to write. He also learned that he was no good at cooking, or at explaining what it was that he was feeling without somehow confusing or hurting people along the way. But most importantly, he learned that despite everything he could do inside, he still wanted to go outside. He had imagined what it would be like to be soaked. Imagining going inside the house and having his mother yell at him because he needed to take off his coat began to thrill the boy. He began dreaming that the raindrops that landed on him were simply trying to hug him. In a strange way, the boy began to fall in love with the rain because the fact was simple. The rain was always falling for him. Once the boy accepted that the color of the sky could change, he couldn't help but fall in love with the rain because the rain broke the barrier between him and the sky. After this realization, the boy wanted to stay inside. There were days when the boy refused to look at the sky. The boy would claim the sun was too bright, or the boy would claim that the clouds were too cold. Though the boy wouldn't admit it, he simply missed the rain. It wasn't because he was stubborn or stupid or even loyal. He just couldn't help himself. Of course, he appreciated all the blue skies offered, but he had grown to love the rain. Knowing that his love could change, the boy became something more than content. But at the same time, he became something less than thrilled. The rain wouldn't always be there when he needed it to be. To some extent, it hurted him. He began to linger inside longer. As he spent more time inside, he began to learn just how powerful his mind was. He discovered that he could create things that weren't there before. He began to imagine things, and with his belief, he made them real. Once, he imagined.
A bird who couldn't fly. A painter who fell in love.
A lover who didn't know how to fall.
A dinosaur who fell out of love.
A man who couldn't stop talking.
A person who could see the future.
A wife who couldn't stop caring.
A husband who just didn't understand.
A teacher who could only preach.
A priest who forgot where the keys were.
A ghost who watched funny cartoons.
A computer who thought it was a real boy.
An angel who knew God's name.
A devil who flew too close to the sun.
A kid who kept falling in love.
A doctor who had all the answers.
A baby who never learned how to grow up.
A hero who fell into darkness.
A zombie who couldn't stop living.
A giant who woke up every time something good happened.
A nobody who didn't know their name.
A somebody who wove fate and time together.
A lion who cries themselves to sleep.
A monster who wished that others saw it differently.
A horse who never stopped believing.
A boy who couldn't help himself.
A seed who sprouted hope into the world.
A mother who carried the burdens of the world.
A father who thought that dogs and cats were the same.
A star who kept falling from grace.
A student who never found enough time to sleep.
A girl who stopped existing and yet still lingered.
A villain who desperately wanted to be understood.
A professor who loved all life had to offer.
A bike who had seen one too many years go by.
A dancer who held their arms wide open.
A foreigner who knew that his time was over.
A roommate who never knew the sky could be so blue.
A soul who thought that there was nothing after death.
A robot who never wanted to feel anything again.
A gamer who felt the grass between their toes.
A hunter who ended a life with nothing but a knife.
A spirit who wanted to linger a little longer.
A moon who created the first humans to be loved for. A frog who wanted to be nothing more than seen as human.
A prince who could never fit in, and a princess who hid in the shadows.
A child who wanted to go back home.
A stranger who forgot which way north was.
A survivor who lived to tell the tale of living.
A car who thought life was a highway.
A book that talks like an open book.
A joy who would last forever.
A life who would never stop being a beauty.
A gambler who kept trying their luck.
A beggar who played every hand.
A fraud who always cried when the sun went down.
A machine who dreamed a dream.
A performer who didn't know what to say.
A wanderer who sang songs for others.
A musician who talked in hands.
An otter who wrote away into people's hearts.
A presenter
who had lost all control.
A pretender who knew that all the world was a stage.
A daughter whose smile answers every question.
A son who always found their way back home.
A medic who gave without ever counting the cost.
A king who prayed that the burden of responsibility be given to someone else.
A queen who laughed in the face of danger.
A rat who curled up next to the drunk and sad.
A comedian who never laughed at their own jokes.
A cowboy who would carry that weight.
A woman who always had time to listen.
A guy who didn't know his left and rights.
A gal who saw through everyone's lies and tricks.
A scholar who dedicated their life to the unknown.
A traveler who learned the value of a warm bed.
A sinner who hugged themselves when no one else would.
A sadness who crept its way into their hearts.
A tree who grew old despite never knowing what the world had to offer.
A couple who never found what it was they needed.
A nurse who smiled to themselves to sleep.
A reader who understood the words to everything.
A creep who thought they didn't belong here.
A writer who typed because they had no other choice.
A wizard who loved being a part of the Shadow Wizard gang.
A boxer who learned that they were in the process of healing.
A loser who just kept losing until they could accept the truth.
A winner who just found out they were the loser.
A dreamer who slept the night away.
A knight who accepted that they couldn't win every battle.
A legend who took their place among the stars.
A believer who saw her face.
A scientist who was tragic in every perfect way.
A poet who never found the words to express their love.
A loner who died while thinking about Alma, or when I chose not to.
A human who was capable of change anytime they perceived it.
A pilot who is made of the ever-changing world.
A jokester who found a reason to smile despite its suffering.
A smoker who died trying to find the truth.
A group who loved a boy who never deserved it.
He made hundreds of thousands of more things as he lingered inside. There was a cat who wrote down the lines to a book that only God would ever understand. There was a druid who grew tired of making potions and decided to join a traveling show. There was even a sun who didn't know that its existence inspired a man who had ceased to exist. As the boy continued to create more things, he found some meaning to his life. The boy became so good at imagining things that they became real, and he cared for all real things. Then one day, he learned he could walk in the rain. Until that moment, he had been dreaming about it, but now, for some reason, he had the courage to walk. He couldn't explain it. He still can't. He stared out the door. He placed his hand out, feeling the coolness of the raindrops fall onto him. He put his coat on. Then, he simply walked. And the more he walked, the more he realized that his love was real. The raindrops covered his glasses. He smiled. He took off the hood of his coat. He understood that he was real. More than that, his feelings were real. Everything he thought about himself was real, as far as the boy could understand. Because of that understanding, he started finding that the things he imagined were not actually from his imagination. They already existed in the real world. He just had to find them. And so he began to search for all the real things that he had come to love. He did find a priest who had lost the keys to God's world and was doing everything possible to open the door for others. He did discover a joy that, though it may leave for a time, would always come back and last with him forever. He did greet the knight who had been broken but did not yield. He did smile with the comedian whose laugh, given the right context, were admittedly funny. He did see an angel, but it turned out that the angel was more human than he originally imagined. He did meet the devil, who was much more forgivable than what the boy was told. He had also found others who seemed to be lost, but were really just like him. They too dreamed of a better world. However, he couldn't stop his imagination from making new things. The more he found, the stronger his imagination became. Suddenly, the boy could no longer tell what was real and what was from his mind. In his confusion, he started to believe everything was real, which, in a strange way, made life more magical. He began forming connections between things that never connected to begin with. He imagined a fine thread woven between all things. He believed that there was a reason for everything that happened. He had always believed that the raindrops were falling for him. And now, he felt as if he was starting to understand what it was he loved. Then, almost as if it fell from the sky, he suffered a wave of exhaustion. He realized that if he dreamed for too long, the real things he had created in the world might feel neglected. But he couldn't stop imagining. He had been imagining for so long that believing became a part of him. He himself wasn't real after believing became so innate to him. There was nothing to him except for the parts he believed to be himself. And yet, the real world still accepted him. It called to him. So he answered. Not because he hated this version of himself, but because he loved the idea of sharing his world with others. Now, he struggles to find a balance of daydreaming and being real. He knows that his imaginary self is his real self, but to the real things, this side of him could simply be a facade. And yet, he can't stop pretending, or else he might really become something fake. It still confuses him, but he tries. When he walks in the rain, a part of him starts to understand that he may never understand. He might never actually find that perfect ratio, but he could always try, and at worst, he could try to pretend. Really, what does it mean for a boy who made imagination his entire life's mission to believe one more thing?